I had just turned 18, and until then, my life had always been surrounded by the endless green of the farm where I was born and raised. For me, that place was a true paradise on earth. Fresh air, free-roaming animals, and a sky so full of stars that it looked like a hand-painted painting. But that summer, something different happened. My parents decided to travel to Europe for a month, and for the first time, I would be alone on the farm. Really alone. Before continuing our story, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Take advantage and leave a like so our content can be delivered even more, and now let's go. In the first few days, I confess that I felt like the owner of the world. No one to tell me what to do, no strict rules, just me and my absolute freedom. I spent hours binge-watching series, listening to loud music and enjoying every corner of the house as if it were my own private fortress. Time seemed to flow slowly, and I felt in control of everything. Until one night, everything changed. I was already getting ready to sleep when I heard a strange noise coming from the barn. It wasn't just any sound. It sounded like a horse neighing, but there was something wrong with it. It was low, pained, almost a cry for help. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the flashlight I always kept by my bed and hurried out. The cold night wind ruffled my hair, and each step on the damp grass felt heavier than the last. The barn was large, made of old wood, and it creaked softly as if it were whispering secrets. When I entered, the beam of the flashlight revealed the worst. Thunder, my father's favorite horse, was lying on the ground, breathing heavily. His eyes expressed pain, and I knew right away that this was not something to be taken lightly. My heart raced. I tried to remember the basic precautions I had learned over the years, but this situation seemed very serious. He needed help, and fast. I thought about calling my parents, but interrupting their vacation for something I could probably solve on my own didn't seem right. That's when I remembered Mr. Custodio, the caretaker, an experienced man who knew every animal on that farm as if they were his own children. Without thinking twice, I ran to my bike and pedaled as fast as I could to his house. The night was dense, almost silent. Only the sound of the cicadas and my rapid breathing broke the air. Every shadow seemed bigger in the dark, but I had no time to be afraid. When I finally arrived, I knocked on the door urgently. Mr. Custodio took only a few seconds to answer, already with his hat in his hand, as if he knew something serious had happened. "What's wrong, girl?" he asked, his voice hoarse and worried. "Trovon. He's in bad shape, very bad." Without wasting time, he grabbed his coat and came with me to the barn. On the way, I just hoped that there was still time to save the horse that my father loved so much. Mr. Custodio crouched down next to Trovon and placed his experienced hand on his forehead. His eyes narrowed in concern. "He's got a fever," he murmured, running his hand over the horse's neck, feeling the unusual heat. My heart raced. A fever was never a good sign. But what could have caused it? Then, with a careful look, Mr. Custodio leaned over and examined Thunder's hind leg. His rough fingers slid carefully over the hoof until they found something hard and strange stuck in the animal's skin. "Here's the problem," he said, pointing. I approached with the flashlight and saw it, a large splinter, embedded deep in the flesh. That must have been very painful. "We need to get this out and clean it well before it gets infected," he explained, his voice firm but calm. Without hesitation, I ran to get what we needed: clean water, rags, and a small first aid kit that we always kept in the barn. When I returned, I saw Mr. Custodio taking some dried herbs from a small leather bag attached to his belt. "This will help with the healing," he said, beginning to crush the leaves between his fingers. I was impressed by his skill. He mixed the herbs with a little water and made a paste that gave off a strong, minty smell. Meanwhile, I prepared to hold Thunder. He moved slightly, uncomfortably, but seemed to trust the old caretaker. Gently, Mr. Custodio removed the splinter using a small pair of pliers. The horse snorted and shook his head. but remained firm. Once the splinter was out, I carefully cleaned the area while he applied the herbal paste to the wound. Time seemed to pass more slowly that night. The two of us worked together, focused, like a perfectly synchronized duo. He taught me every detail of what he did, and I absorbed everything like a sponge. The ancients used these herbs to treat wounds like this, he commented as he lightly massaged Thunder's leg. It works better than many modern medicines. I had never paid so much attention to these things before, but at that moment I was fascinated by his knowledge. When we were done, we stepped back a bit to observe. Thunder seemed relieved, although still tired. His fever would take a while to go down, so we decided to monitor him through the night. "If you want, I can stay here to keep an eye on him," Mr. Custodio offered. I looked at him and smiled. He had already done so much that night, and staying in the barn wasn't exactly comfortable. "No, sir. Go rest at home. If anything happens, I'll run and get you." He hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to insist, but eventually nodded. Before leaving, we sat for a while near the barn and talked. We talked about life, about the old days, about how he learned all this. I discovered incredible stories from his past, things I would never have imagined. The next day, I woke up early and decided to do something special to thank him. I prepared a hearty lunch with everything I knew he liked. When he came to see how Thunder was doing, there was already a hot dish waiting for him. "Is all this for me?" he asked, surprised. "It's the least you've done, sir." He laughed and sat down to eat, satisfied. Later, we went to the barn. Thunder was standing, eating slowly, and his breathing seemed calmer. The fever had disappeared, and the wound was starting to heal. I looked at Mr. Custodio and smiled. "I think we did a good job." He nodded, crossing his arms. "Yes, girl, you did very well." And at that moment, I realized that that night had changed more than just Thunder's health. It had changed the way I saw the world around me. Preparing lunch was a real challenge. I was never a great cook, but after so much effort, I managed to make something that, at the very least, wasn't inedible. When I asked Mr. Custodio to come over for lunch, he accepted without hesitation. "I hope it's good," I said, a little embarrassed as I put the plate on the table. He picked up his fork, took a bite, and smiled. "You know, it's not bad at all," he praised. I breathed a sigh of relief. We chatted while we ate, and for a moment I completely forgot how intense the last night had been. After lunch, he said goodbye and went home, leaving me alone again. The farm, which had once seemed like a paradise of freedom, now had a different side. A certain uneasiness settled over me. Everything around me was vast, silent, and a little scary. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness of the night. The wind blew hard, making the trees sway and produce noises that made my skin crawl. I finally fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, a different noise woke me up. The sound of an engine. I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked out the window and saw the lights of a car near the fish tank. I squinted to see better. I wasn't mistaken. There were two men there, messing with the nets. They were stealing. Fear ran down my spine. I couldn't handle this alone. Without thinking twice, I put on my shoes, grabbed my flashlight, and ran as fast as I could to Mr. Custodio's house. The path seemed longer in the dark, and every twig that snapped beneath my feet made my heart race. I knocked hard on his door, panting. "Mr. Custodio, hurry! There are people stealing the fish!" He didn't need any further explanation. In seconds, he opened the door, already holding his shotgun. His gaze hardened, and he adjusted his hat with a firm movement. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his tone serious. We headed back to the farm, moving quickly but silently. When we reached the tank, he pointed the shotgun upward and fired a shot. The boom echoed through the night. "You know you shouldn't be here!" he shouted, his voice strong and determined. The thieves, taken by surprise, looked at each other for a second before dropping everything and running towards the car. In a few seconds, they disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up dust behind them. My body was still shaking from the adrenaline, but relief came soon after. "I think it's best if I stay here tonight," Mr. Custodio said, putting away his shotgun with a heavy sigh. I didn't argue. The farm seemed less safe than I had imagined, and at that moment, his presence was a huge comfort. We sat on the porch to catch our breath. He took a canteen and offered me a sip of hot tea. The tension gradually dissipated. "You handled the situation well," he said, looking at me approvingly. "Well, if it weren't for you, I don't know what I would have done," I replied, laughing, still nervous. The conversation flowed naturally after that. We talked about the farm, about old times, about simple things in life. For the first time, I saw a more relaxed side of him. The calmer atmosphere made me realize something. I was still in my nightclothes, not at all appropriate for being next to a man who had helped me so much. I managed to find some of his wife's old clothes and put on a loose, comfortable shirt. Now more relaxed, I arranged a corner in the living room and wrapped myself in the sheets. Mr. Custodio stayed in the rocking chair, keeping a watchful eye, making sure nothing else happened that night. The next morning, we woke up refreshed. We went back to the farm together, and when I stepped onto that land again, I felt something different. That place, which before seemed like just a scene from my life, now had a new meaning. I saw it with different eyes. It wasn't just land, animals, and scattered houses. It was history. It was life. And the people who were part of it were precious. Before Mr. Custodio left, I looked at him and smiled. "Thank you for everything, really." He patted my shoulder lightly and smiled back. "The farm runs in your blood. You just needed to see that. And I saw it. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more adventures.